The first time I realized something was off, it wasn't because of what happened in the boardroom. It was the way she moved. Her name was Tessa Harlow, and she wasn't like the other security personnel at Valkyrian Industries. Most of them were big, intimidating guys who looked like they moonlighted as bouncers. But Tessa, she was quiet, barely spoke unless necessary, and had this sharp, almost predatory way of scanning a room. At first glance, you'd think she was just another private security hire, but I knew better. I'm Caden Royce, the CEO of Valkyrian, a biotech company that's making waves in the industry. Or at least, that's what I tell people. Truth is, the job's mostly just stress, late nights, and making sure the board doesn't tear me apart when numbers dip even slightly. My life changed on a rainy Thursday. The board meeting had just wrapped up, and I was heading out of the building when I noticed Tessa standing by the elevator. She wasn't supposed to be there. Normally, the head of my security detail, Mason, handled my movements, but today it was just her. "Where's Mason?" I asked, stepping into the elevator. "Out sick," Tessa replied, her voice calm and even. "I'm covering for him." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. She wasn't one for small talk, and honestly, neither was I. The elevator ride was silent, save for the hum of the machinery and the distant sound of rain pelting the windows. But something about the way Tessa stood, tall, alert, her hand resting casually near her belt, put me on edge. When the doors opened to the parking garage, I stepped out, glancing around. The place was eerily quiet, with only a few cars scattered across the lot. Tessa was right behind me, her footsteps light but deliberate. And that's when it happened. A figure stepped out from behind a pillar, holding a gun. "Mr. Royce," the man said, his voice cold. "You're coming with me." I froze. My heart was pounding, my brain scrambling to process what was happening. Tessa didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, she stepped in front of me, drawing her weapon. "Put the gun down," she said, her tone sharp and commanding. The man sneered. "You think I won't shoot him?" "Maybe you will," Tessa said, her voice unwavering. "But I promise you won't walk out of here alive." It happened fast. Too fast for me to follow. 1 second, the man was shouting something, and the next, Tessa moved like lightning, disarming him with a move so precise it felt like I was watching a movie. Within seconds, he was on the ground, groaning in pain, while Tessa calmly secured his weapon. "Call the police," she said, glancing at me. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of urgency in her eyes. I nodded, fumbling for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. By the time the cops arrived, Tessa had everything under control. The man was handcuffed with zip ties she'd pulled from her belt, and she was standing over him, completely calm, like this was just another day at the office. I couldn't stop staring at her. Who was she? After giving our statements to the police, Tessa drove me home. The ride was quiet, but my mind was racing. "Thank you," I said finally, breaking the silence. "It's my job," she replied, her eyes focused on the road. "Still," I said, my voice softer, "you saved my life." She didn't respond, but I thought I saw the faintest flicker of a smile on her face. When we got to my apartment building, I hesitated before getting out of the car. "Tessa," I said, turning to face her, "why are you doing this? Why security?" She raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "I don't know," I said, searching for the right words. "You just don't seem like the type. You're overqualified." Her expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes. Something distant, almost haunted. "Let's just say I'm good at protecting people," she said, her tone leaving no room for further questions. I wanted to press her, to ask more, but something told me she wouldn't answer. So, I let it go. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she'd moved, the way she'd handled everything with such precision. She wasn't just good at her job, she was exceptional. And it wasn't just her skills that intrigued me. There was something about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I didn't know it then, but Tessa Harlow was about to change my life in ways I could never have imagined. The next morning, I expected things to return to normal, but they didn't. How could they? Every time I stepped into the office, I couldn't help but think about what had happened in the parking garage. About Tessa. Word had spread quickly. By the time I got to work, everyone seemed to know that I'd been the target of an attempted kidnapping. Most of the details were exaggerated, of course. I overheard one intern whispering about a high-speed car chase, and another claiming Tessa had taken down 5 armed men. Tessa, meanwhile, acted like nothing had happened. She was back at her post near my office door, standing quietly with her usual calm demeanor. It was as if saving my life hadn't even fazed her, but I couldn't just let it go. "Tessa," I said as I passed her desk that morning, "do you have a minute?" She looked up from the tablet she was reviewing, her expression unreadable. "Of course, sir." "In private," I added, gesturing toward my office. She nodded, following me inside. I closed the door behind her and turned to face her. "I need to know something," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "Go ahead," she replied. "How did you know?" I asked. "About the guy in the parking garage. You weren't even supposed to be there yesterday." She tilted her head slightly, considering her answer. "It's my job to assess threats," she said after a moment. "Mason called in sick, so I stepped in. I noticed a few things out of place. Unfamiliar vehicles in the garage. Someone loitering near the exit. It wasn't hard to figure out something was wrong." I frowned. "That's more than just assessing threats. You're not like the rest of the security team, are you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked me in the eye, her gaze steady. "No," she said finally. "I'm not." "Then who are you?" I asked, my voice soft but insistent. For the first time, her composure faltered, just slightly. She glanced away, as if debating how much to tell me. Then she said, "I was in the military. Special operations. That's all you need to know." I nodded slowly, digesting her words. It explained a lot. Her precision, her calm under pressure, the way she seemed to notice things nobody else did. But it also raised more questions. "Why this job?" I asked. "Why work for Valkyrian?" Her eyes flicked back to mine, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "I was looking for something quieter. Less complicated." This seemed like a good fit. Quieter, less complicated. I almost laughed. Protecting the CEO of a major biotech company wasn't exactly low stress. But I didn't push her. Something told me there was more to her story, but she wasn't ready to share it. "All right," I said finally. "If you ever want to talk about it, my door's open." She gave me a small nod, her expression softening just slightly. "Thank you, sir." After she left, I sat at my desk, replaying our conversation in my head. There was something about Tessa Harlow that didn't add up. She was more than just a bodyguard. I didn't know why, but I felt like I'd only scratched the surface of who she really was. Over the next few weeks, Tessa and I fell into a rhythm. She was always nearby, quiet, professional, and hyper-aware of her surroundings. It was comforting, in a way, knowing she was there, but it was also distracting. I started to notice things I hadn't before. The way she kept her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, but always perfectly neat. The way she carried herself, confident and unyielding, like nothing could shake her. And the way her eyes softened, just a little, when she let her guard down, even for a moment. I tried to ignore it. She was my employee, after all. Getting involved would be unprofessional, not to mention complicated. But the more time I spent around her, the harder it was to push those thoughts aside. And then, just when I thought things were settling down, everything changed again. It happened during a gala event for Valkyrian's top investors. The board insisted I attend, so there I was, mingling with people I barely knew, and trying to keep the conversation focused on our latest projects. Tessa was there, of course, stationed near the entrance. She was wearing a sleek black suit, her posture as rigid as ever. The event was going smoothly, until it wasn't. I was talking to one of the investors when I noticed Tessa move. It was subtle, but I'd learned to recognize the way her body tensed when something was wrong. She was scanning the room, her hand drifting toward her earpiece. I excused myself and made my way over to her. "What's going on?" I asked under my breath. "Something feels off," she said, her eyes still scanning the room. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, there was a loud crash. A table near the back of the room had been overturned, and people were shouting. My heart started pounding as Tessa grabbed my arm. "Stay close to me," she said, her voice firm. She guided me toward a side exit, her movements quick but controlled. I didn't argue. Whatever was happening, I trusted her to handle it. As we reached the exit, a man stepped into our path. He was holding something, a small device with blinking lights. "Don't move," he said, his voice low and threatening. Tessa didn't hesitate. She stepped in front of me, her body blocking mine completely. "Put it down," she said, her tone cold and commanding. The man didn't listen. He took a step closer, raising the device. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I thought this was it. But then Tessa moved. It was over in seconds. She disarmed him with a move so fast I barely saw it, then knocked him to the ground. The device clattered to the floor, and Tessa kicked it away before pinning the man with her knee. "Call the police," she said over her shoulder. I nodded, fumbling for my phone, just like I had in the parking garage. By the time the authorities arrived, Tessa had everything under control. The man was handcuffed, and the device turned out to be a fake bomb, a scare tactic. But the incident left me shaken. Later that night, as Tessa drove me home, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She'd saved my life again, without hesitation. And for the first time, I realized just how much she meant to me. After the gala incident, something shifted between Tessa and me. It wasn't something we acknowledged directly, but it was there, this unspoken understanding. She had saved my life twice now, and both times she'd put herself in danger without a second thought. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the calm way she handled chaos, about the quiet strength she carried with her everywhere she went. But it wasn't just admiration anymore. Somewhere along the way, it had become something more. The problem was, I had no idea how to handle it. She was still my employee, my head of security, and I knew the lines we weren't supposed to cross. But I also knew that trying to keep my feelings bottled up was becoming impossible. Things came to a head about 2 weeks after the gala. I was working late in my office, going over some reports, when Tessa knocked on the door. "Come in," I said, setting the papers down. She stepped inside, her expression calm as always. "I wanted to go over a few updates with you," she said. "We've increased security at all public events, and I've had the team run new drills to prepare for similar incidents in the future." "Good," I said, nodding. "Thank you for handling that." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "I also looked into the man from the gala. He wasn't working alone. The investigation is still ongoing, but it seems he was part of a larger group targeting Valkyrian." I frowned. "A larger group? What kind of group?" "Anti-biotech extremists," she said. "They've been active for years, but this is the first time they've targeted us directly." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing a hand over my face. "Great. That's exactly what we need right now." "I'll handle it," Tessa said firmly. I looked at her, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The way she said it, calm, confident, like there was nothing in the world she couldn't handle. It was impossible not to feel safe around her. "Thank you," I said softly. "For everything." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "It's my job," she said, but there was something in her voice, something gentler than usual. Before I could stop myself, I said, "Is it just a job to you?" Her expression shifted, the faintest flicker of surprise crossing her face. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "You've done more for me than anyone else ever has. You've put your life on the line for me twice. That doesn't feel like just a job." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at the floor, her hands clasped in front of her. "It's not just a job," she said finally, her voice quiet. Our eyes met, and for a moment, it felt like the rest of the world had fallen away. But then she took a step back, her composure snapping back into place. "I should go," she said quickly. "Let me know if you need anything else." Before I could respond, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept drifting back to our conversation, to the way she'd looked at me, the way her voice had softened. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. I decided to take a break and clear my head. So I went for a walk around the building. As I passed by the security office, I noticed Tessa sitting at her desk, reviewing some documents. Without thinking, I knocked on the open door. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Sir, do you have a minute?" I asked. She nodded, setting the papers aside. "Of course." I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," I began. Tessa frowned slightly. "What about it?" I hesitated, then said, "You said this isn't just a job to you. What did you mean by that?" She was silent for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Try me," I said, my voice softer than I intended. She took a deep breath, then looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. "I've been protecting you for a long time," she said. I frowned. "You've only been on the security team for a year." She shook her head. "That's not what I mean. Before Valkyrian, before any of this, I've been watching over you for years. I just never made contact." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Why?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, she looked like she might not answer. Then she said, "Because I owe you everything." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, then said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I shook my head, confusion swirling in my chest. "No. Should I?" Her gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw something vulnerable in her eyes. 10 years ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you were part of a clinical trial at Valkyrian. It was one of the company's first projects, an experimental fertility treatment." I nodded slowly. "I remember. It was a big success. It helped hundreds of families have children. It helped me," she said quietly. My breath caught in my throat. "I was the donor," she continued. "One of the first to volunteer for the program. The embryos they used, the ones that became your children, they came from me." The room spun, and I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. "You're saying you're their biological mother?" She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes." I stared at her, my mind racing. My children, Amelia and Finn, my whole world, they were hers too. "Tessa," I whispered, my voice breaking. She looked away, her expression pained. "I never intended for you to find out. I just wanted to make sure you and the kids were safe. That's why I took this job. To protect you. To make up for the life I couldn't give them." I didn't know what to say. My world had been turned upside down in an instant, and all I could do was stand there, staring at the woman who had just upended everything I thought I knew. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a job to her. It never had been. And as I looked at her, I realized something else. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It wasn't just about what she'd done for me, or the secrets she'd kept. I cared about her. More than I should. More than I knew how to handle. "Tessa," I said again, my voice steadying. "We need to talk about this. All of it." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I know." Tessa's revelation shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. My kids, Amelia and Finn, weren't just the result of some anonymous donor program. They were hers. Hers. The pieces started falling into place, and the weight of it all hit me like a freight train. Every little thing about her. The way she always seemed to care, just a little too much. The way she never hesitated to put herself in harm's way for me. The way she looked at Amelia and Finn whenever she happened to see them. It all made sense now. But the thing that terrified me the most wasn't the truth she had just dropped on me. It was how I felt about her. We sat in my office in silence for what felt like hours. Tessa stood near the window, her arms crossed, staring out at the city below. I stayed behind my desk, gripping the edge as if it could ground me. "I should have told you sooner," she said finally, her voice quiet. "Yeah," I said, my voice hollow. "You probably should have." She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "I didn't want to disrupt your life. Or theirs. You've given them everything I couldn't. I didn't want to take that away from you." "Take what away from me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "They're my kids, Tessa. I've been their father since the day they were born. You don't just drop a bomb like this and expect everything to stay the same. She flinched, just slightly, and I immediately regretted my tone. I'm sorry, I said, running a hand through my hair. I don't know how to process this. I understand, she said, her voice steady but soft. No, I said, shaking my head. You don't. You've been keeping this secret for years, Tessa. How am I supposed to just move on from that? I don't expect you to, she said. I just wanted you to know the truth. You deserve that much. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. And what about them? What about Amelia and Finn? Do you expect me to tell them? Her silence was answer enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced around my apartment, replaying our conversation in my head. Amelia and Finn were at their mom's place that week, my ex-wife, Natalie, and I couldn't stop thinking about them. Would they want to know the truth? Would it change anything? I thought back to the times Tessa had interacted with them. There weren't many. They usually only came to the office on special occasions, but every time they did, she'd been there, watching over them, keeping them safe, and now I understood why. The next day, I called Natalie. Is everything okay? She asked when she picked up, her tone concerned. Yeah, I said quickly. Everything's fine. I just wanted to ask you something about the donor program. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Why? She asked, her voice cautious. I found out something recently, I said carefully. Something about the donor. Caden, she said, her tone softening. We agreed not to dig into that. The program was anonymous for a reason. I know, I said. But what if the donor wasn't who we thought they were? What do you mean? I hesitated, then said, what if they're closer than we realized? Another long pause. Caden, she said slowly, what's going on? I can't explain right now, I said. But I need to figure this out. For them. Natalie sighed. If you think it's important, then do what you have to do. Just be careful. This kind of thing could really mess with them. I know, I said quietly. Thanks. I spent the next few days avoiding Tessa. Not because I was angry at her, but because I didn't know how to face her. Every time I thought about her, about what she told me, my chest tightened. But she didn't avoid me. She was still there, standing outside my office, watching over me like always. And every time I saw her, I felt that same pull, that same ache in my chest that I couldn't ignore anymore. It all came to a head one evening, when she found me sitting alone in the conference room. You've been avoiding me, she said, her voice calm but firm. I didn't bother denying it. I needed time to think, I said. Did you figure anything out? She asked, stepping closer. I looked up at her, and for the first time, I let myself really see her, not just as my head of security, but as the woman she was. Strong, determined, vulnerable in ways she rarely let anyone see. I don't know what to do, I admitted. This changes everything. It doesn't have to, she said. Yes, it does, I said, standing up. Tessa, you're not just some random person who happens to work for me. You're their biological mother. You're part of this, whether you want to be or not. She looked away, her jaw tightening. I know, she said quietly. And I'm not asking to be a part of their lives. I just wanted to make sure you and they were safe. That's all I've ever wanted. That's not enough, I said, my voice soft but firm. She looked back at me, her eyes wide with surprise. They deserve to know the truth, I continued. And so do you. They're your kids too, Tessa. You've sacrificed so much for them, and they don't even know it. That's not fair to you. Or to them. Her lips parted, but no words came out. And as for me, I hesitated, then took a step closer to her. I can't stop thinking about you. Not just because of what you've done for me, but because of who you are. I care about you, Tessa, more than I should, and I don't know what to do about it. For the first time, her composure cracked. She looked at me like she wasn't sure if she should step closer or run away. Caden, she whispered, her voice trembling. Before she could say anything else, I reached out and gently took her hand. We'll figure this out, I said. Together. All of it. She stared at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, everything changed. The hardest part wasn't telling the kids. It was deciding how to tell them. Tessa and I spent days talking it through. We wanted to be honest, but not overwhelm them. They were only 8 and 6. Amelia was sensitive and thoughtful, while Finn barely sat still long enough to have a conversation. How do you tell children something that could shake the foundation of their world? In the end, we decided to keep it simple. For now, we'd explain that Tessa was important to them in a way they hadn't known before. The rest, the details about her being their biological mother, the story of how she came to work for me, would come when they were older. But first, we had to talk to Natalie. When Tessa and I sat down with her, I could see the tension in her eyes. Natalie and I had our differences, but she was a good mother and cared deeply about the kids. That's why I wasn't surprised when her first reaction wasn't anger, but concern. So, let me get this straight, Natalie said, her voice calm but firm. You've known for weeks, and now you're telling me that their biological mother has been your head of security this whole time. Tessa nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Yes, but I've never tried to interfere with their lives. That was never my intention. Natalie studied her for a long moment, then turned to me. And you're okay with this? I met her gaze and nodded. She saved my life, Natalie. Twice. She's not just anyone. And I think the kids deserve to know, eventually. Natalie leaned back in her chair, letting out a long sigh. This is a lot to process, Caden. I know, I said softly. For a moment, she was quiet, her eyes flicking back to Tessa. You care about them, don't you? With everything I have, Tessa said, her voice steady. Natalie exhaled slowly, then nodded. All right, we'll tell them together. The following weekend, we sat Amelia and Finn down in the living room. Tessa sat next to me on the couch, her posture stiff but calm. Natalie perched on the armrest, her hand resting on Amelia's shoulder. Mommy, what's going on? Amelia asked, her big brown eyes darting between us. Finn was less patient. Is this about me breaking the vase? Because that was an accident, I swear. Natalie stifled a laugh. No, sweetheart, this isn't about the vase. It's about something really important. I cleared my throat, my palms sweating. You both know Tessa, right? Amelia nodded, and Finn grinned. Yeah, she's the one who always lets me press the elevator buttons. That's right, I said with a small smile. But Tessa isn't just someone who works with me. She's special. Amelia tilted her head. Special how? I glanced at Tessa, who gave me a small nod. She's connected to you, I said gently, in a way you didn't know before. Tessa is the reason we were able to have you. Amelia's brows furrowed. What do you mean? Tessa leaned forward, her voice soft but steady. It means that, before you were born, I helped your dad and mom in a very special way. I gave a part of myself to make sure you could be here. Finn blinked, his little face scrunching up in confusion. You're saying you made us? Not quite, Tessa said with a gentle smile. Your mom and dad are the ones who've loved you and raised you. But I'm connected to you in another way. A biological way. Amelia's eyes widened. You mean like you're part of us? Yes, Tessa said, her voice trembling just slightly. I am. The room was silent for a long moment as the kids processed what we'd said. Then Finn, ever the ball of energy, grinned and said, That's so cool. Does that mean I get 2 moms now? Tessa let out a breathy laugh, and I felt the tension in my chest ease just a little. Something like that, she said. Amelia was quieter, her brow furrowed in thought. Finally, she looked up at Tessa. Does this mean you love us too? Tessa's composure broke, just for a second. Her eyes glistened as she leaned closer. More than you'll ever know, she said softly. Amelia smiled, and for the first time, I saw something new in her eyes. A connection she didn't fully understand yet, but one that was already taking root. In the weeks that followed, life didn't change as much as I thought it would. Amelia and Finn took the news in stride, treating Tessa the same way they always had, like someone they trusted and admired. But there were little moments that reminded me things were different now, like the way Amelia would sit next to Tessa during family dinners, asking her endless questions about her childhood, or the way Finn started calling her Mom Tessa, much to her embarrassment. As for me, I couldn't ignore how my feelings for her had deepened. Knowing what she had sacrificed, knowing the quiet love she carried for the kids, it was impossible not to fall for her. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Tessa and I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below. "You're amazing with them," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "They're amazing kids," she replied, her voice soft. I turned to look at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Tessa, I meant what I said before. I care about you. And I think I've cared about you for a long time. I just didn't realize it." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Caden, you don't have to say that." "I want to," I said, cutting her off. "I know it's complicated. I know this wasn't how you planned things. But I don't care. You've already become part of this family. And I don't want to pretend like this is just a job for you anymore. It's more than that. You're more than that." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw her let her guard down completely. "I care about you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. In that moment, I realized that the life I thought I had, the one I thought I'd carefully built, wasn't the life I wanted anymore. This was Tessa, Amelia, Finn, us. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't simple. But it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.